Chapter 542, Bayam under curfew. Seeing Jayaman Sparrow put on his coat and hat and pick up his cane, Danitz recalled that he had apparently been forgotten. He coughed once, and under the gaze of two pairs of eyes, he said, "Didu, I need to follow." "It's best not to. Who knows what would happen? Before this, we had only stopped at Banzi Harbor, but we ended up encountering a rather strange situation. Last night, I brought Jayaman Sparrow to visit the Resistance's liaison and ended up being involved with the sea god's curse. Today, if I were to follow this madman to search for Letitia and the other archaeologists, then who knows what would happen." Danitz looked down and glanced down at his left arm, which was still tied with a splint. In a matter of days, he felt that he had encountered more events than he had in months or even half a year. "You can stay here, but someone will be here for the sweep later," Ellen laughed. "Someone will sweep this area, and then the great pirate Blazing would be caught and turned into gold pounds." Danitz frowned and laughed dryly. "Aside from the reward, there aren't many opportunities to earn money from the military. I'm very willing to give it a try. The only problem is that you'll have to wait a few minutes. I'll don a disguise, Mr. Captain. I don't want to put you on the spot by causing unnecessary misunderstandings. If I don't disguise myself, for a great pirate like myself to engage in operations with the military and the church, it will only result in me being captured immediately." Danitz imagined himself being pressed down, having a knee crushing his back, struggling like a catfish. After thinking for a few seconds, Ellen took out an iron-black mask from his inside pocket and tossed it over. "Just put it on, I will explain the rest. Yes, there's no need to waste time on useless disguises." Klein evaluated inwardly. Without a word, he turned the handle and walked out of the room. Ellen followed close behind, and Danitz hurried to catch up with them as he grabbed his coat and put on the iron mask. When they reached the street where there was a lot of flooding but no pedestrians on the streets, Klein pressed down on his hat and asked, "How do we start?" Ellen laughed. "In regions. My Beyonder job has some special characteristics. As long as I see the person in the flesh, in a photo, or a sketch, then I'll be able to firmly remember the target's appearance and obtain an additional sense on an extraordinary level. Yes, I can also detect any abnormalities and grasp indistinct traces. When put together, it allows me to do investigative sweeps in a rather effective manner. Sequence 8 Sheriff of the Arbiter Pathway." Klein nodded thoughtfully and asked as they walked, "Do you have their belongings?" The poster Danitz had posted last night had a portrait of Letitia attached to it. Klein had used ritualistic magic to pray to himself and produce it. "No," Ellen shook his head. "We have yet to learn of their previous whereabouts. The only things that we can confirm is that they didn't return from Saimim Island until around 3 p.m. yesterday, and after 2 p.m., no passenger ships left the docks, and that due to the weather this morning, only entry is permitted. In other words, Letitia and company haven't left by boat yet." Klein understood what Ellen meant. Danitz suddenly let out a sneer. "That doesn't mean anything. Maybe they left Bayam yesterday afternoon and went to the other cities on the island." Blue Mountain Island was the largest island in the Rorsted archipelago. It was very large in size and had dense forests and rich mineral resources. Therefore, there were many cities on the island, and they were all built around fertile land with astonishing mineral resource reserves. For this wealth, the Lone Kingdom first bribed the indigenous princes, then forced them to use force, and finally set up the Governor General's office. In a more efficient manner, it opened wide roads leading to cities and completed several important railways. This was in the form of establishing a corresponding railway company to sell shares and raise funds on the Backland Stock Exchange. Of course, these large projects were accompanied by the deaths of many local people, sinister construction workplaces, excessive work, almost slave-like treatment, and a fairly modest salary, which allowed bodies to be buried one after another under the roadbed and railroad ties. To this day, a large number of locals still loathed the railway, believing that it had swallowed a large amount of human life and brought about countless suffering. It was the symbol of an evil god and devil. Ellen turned his head to glance at Danitz and said, "If they leave by land, then there's nothing to worry about." "Why?" Danitz asked, puzzled. "It's very simple. The roads that lead through the forest are controlled by the resistance, and the majority of the resistance are believers of the sea god. Hence, how would Letitia and the others, who were responsible for Calvatua's breakdown, dare to pass through these regions at night? If they dared to, then it can only mean one thing. They didn't realize the severity of the consequences of what they had done in the sea god ruins on Saimim Island. This also negates the conjecture that either the Moses ascetic order or Element Dawn has other motives. Klein controlled the urge to shake his head, and he followed Elend into another street. Without explaining anything, Ellen took out a notice and handed it to Bayam and Sparrow. The main target is this woman. I drew this woman. Klein glanced at it before tossing it to Danitz. At this moment, they heard the intense sound of fighting coming from the side room. She has been found, Danitz asked the question Klein wanted to ask. Probably not, Ellen shook his head. According to the orders, the first thing to do when discovering the target is to release red fireworks. Once it appears, everyone will close in on that location. If one encounters other wanted criminals who they cannot handle alone, they are to release orange fireworks. Surrounding teams would rush over to reinforce them. If they're ordinary pirates or criminals, we are to handle them ourselves. Let's wait. Perhaps it's because the fireworks couldn't be released in time. While he was talking, the glass on the third story of the house, facing the street, shattered with a crack. A bear-like, brawny man jumped down. His speed was extremely fast as he ran into the distance like a cheetah. At this moment, an enormous shadow enveloped him, and gattling sounds came from the sky above. The brawny man's body was almost torn apart by the machine gun fire as he fell to the ground without putting up any resistance. Blood flowed out and dyed the ground red. If the residents weren't forbidden to leave their homes, then they would have screamed. At some point in time, the airship had floated over, but it didn't stop and had turned toward another direction. Goltat, Danitz recognized the victim. Seeing Bayam and Sparrow turn his head over, he forced a smile and said, "This is the leader of a pirate crew. He's from Fasak, with a bounty of 950 pounds. Fasak, so they really are savages? He actually ran on a curfewed street, completely unaware to be on guard of attacks from above. That's right. Some pirates spent the entire night in a drunken stupor. They have no idea that even airships have been dispatched. If he had planned his escape route, then he might have been able to dodge the machine gun fire." Klein looked away and watched the monster in dark blue paint fly over the roof. When Danitz saw the pirate's outcome, he was grateful that he had followed Bayam out. Seeing that the alert over here had been lifted, Elend didn't linger any longer and led Klein and Danitz to the area that he was in charge of. After walking quickly for 5 or 6 minutes, they saw a barricade at the intersection in front of them. Guns were mounted and cannons were set up. Lone soldiers in red uniforms stood guard over the area in silence. On the other side of the barricade, 20 to 30 corpses lay scattered on the ground, forming a vanguard formation. Their clothes were tattered and their faces gaunt, clearly indicating that they were natives. A little further away, several young native children were hiding in the corner. They were quietly looking at them in fear. Their eyes were dark and their faces were dirty. Klein and company fell silent for a few seconds before circling around the area. Backland Sherwood Burrow. Fours lifted the ceramic cup from the table and felt the heat. She roused herself and quietly waited for any changes. The temperature of the hot water dropped rapidly, and a thin layer of ice appeared on the surface of the liquid. White frost appeared on the rim of the cup. "I'm a trickmaster now," Fours closed her eyes in delight. She didn't waste any time after receiving the spirit eater's stomach pouch, immediately concocting the potion and completing the advancement. She obtained quite a number of spells with lower potency. Among them, Fours' favorites were fog, wind, flash, freezing, electric shock, and tumble, which made people slip. Only at this point did she feel that she was a complete beyonder. She was no longer someone who could only pass through walls or rely solely on ritualistic magic. At almost noon, Elend, with the help of Klein and Danitz, had completed most of the investigation. "Let's eat some bread and drink some water before continuing." He took off his boat-shaped hat and spoke with parched lips. Klein was about to nod when he saw an orange firework fly into the air not far away. Without hesitation, Ellen put on his hat and ran in that direction. "I'll go and support them." Orange means other wanted criminals that cannot be dealt with. Who could it be? Dannett said to himself with interest. He switched to a gait of raising his legs high as he proceeded forward, hoping that the battle would be over before he arrived. Then, he saw Bayam and Sparrow follow behind just Ellen, leaving him alone by himself. Glancing at the dark blue monster, flying in his direction, Dannett let out a hollow laugh and quickened his pace. 2 minutes later, they arrived at their destination and saw a house with a lawn facing the street. 3 or 4 military personnel were lying on the ground. Their faces were pale, and their bodies were trembling as if they had been thrown into a frozen lake. The more Klein walked in that direction, the colder it felt. It was as if he had arrived in the polar regions. Soon, he discovered that the ditches outside the house were filled with thick snow. Just then, a burst of female laughter came from inside the house at varying pitches, alternating between craziness and strangeness. "How hot here? Jayahataha. How hot here? Jayahataha." Dannett couldn't help but stop and touch his neck, which was covered in goosebumps, with his right hand. With a clanging sound, the window opened and a charred body flew out. It landed hard on the ground, as if it were caught in an inferno. With just a glance, Klein was able to recognize through his spiritual intuition that this was one of the 3 male adventurers who had followed Letitia.